Ukraine is repeating the exact same mistake that caused Germany World War I. Here's how. It's been more than a month since Ukraine launched its attack into Russia's Kursk region. Although the battle is far from over, we have enough data to make some preliminary assessments. Today we're going to look at the similarities between Ukraine's Kursk incursion and Germany's 1918 spring offensive, its last-ditch attempt to win World War I. The reason we're doing this historical comparison is because it shows how Kursk could go horribly wrong for Ukraine in the coming months. Let's start with some basic historical context. As Germany entered 1918, it found itself in a difficult strategic position. Germany had lost millions of troops in the previous years, and the war was putting an enormous strain on its economy. German generals warned that the army could not afford any more exhausting and debilitating battles on the defensive. Here's what Erich Ludendorff, one of Germany's top generals, wrote in his post-war memoirs. The interests of the army were best served by the offensive. In defense, it was bound to gradually succumb to the ever-increasing hostile superiority in men and material. This feeling was shared by everybody. It amounted to a definite conviction which obsessed them utterly, that nothing but an offensive could win the war. Ludendorff developed a plan for a final knockout blow against the Allies. The goal was to launch a powerful strike into northern France in order to encircle and destroy British forces there. The Germans hoped this would throw the Allies into chaos and force them to sue for peace on terms favorable to Germany. This was an ambitious plan, and the Germans spent months preparing. They especially allocated their best troops for the operation, gave them a special training course in assault tactics, and provided them with the finest equipment. Now, what relevance does this have for the Kursk incursion? Just like the Germans, the Ukrainians have realized that they can't win a war of attrition on the defensive. Troop morale was steadily falling due to a string of losses since the autumn of 2022. The Ukrainians decided that their only viable choice is to go on the offensive. The main goals of the Ukrainian attack on Kursk are: 1. Seize Russian territory that they can use as leverage in future peace negotiations. 2. Force Russia to redirect troops from the Donbass and other fronts. And 3. Boost Ukrainian morale. Just like the Germans, the Ukrainians spent months preparing their offensive. They selected some of their most experienced battalions and armed them with the best NATO equipment at their disposal. Let's return to the 1918 German spring offensive. On March 21, 1918, German troops began to advance on enemy positions following hours of heavy artillery bombardment. At first, the Germans succeeded in achieving spectacular tactical breakthroughs. In just the first day of fighting, the Germans captured more than 255 kilometers of territory and over 20,000 British prisoners of war. By April 5th, the Germans had advanced more than 3,000 kilometers and taken 90,000 prisoners. These were undoubtedly impressive results, especially when you consider that the front line barely moved in the preceding few years. Despite these apparent successes, the Germans failed to achieve their operational and strategic goals. The British army did not collapse. On the contrary, the Allies quickly recovered from their initial shock, stabilized their defensive lines, and began punishing counterattacks. The Germans soon discovered that they had walked themselves into a trap. The land that they had captured was difficult to defend and of little strategic value. At the same time, the first stage of the offensive bled the German army dry. Between March 21st and April 5th, 1918, the Germans lost up to 250,000 troops. These were not poorly trained conscripts, but elite stormtrooper units. The Imperial German Army never recovered from the failed 1918 spring offensive. Just a couple months after the German offensive ran out of gas, the Allies launched their own massive offensive. It was yet another disaster for the German high command. German troops surrendered en masse as Allied tanks and soldiers pierced through German lines. The German army was simply too tired and demoralized to offer serious resistance. As the military defeats piled up, the political situation in Germany began to unravel as well. In late October, a revolution broke out that toppled the German monarchy. The new government in Berlin began peace negotiations with the Allies from a position of weakness. Ukraine is headed on the exact same trajectory in Kursk. Just like the Germans in 1918, the Ukrainians have walked themselves into a trap. They have sacrificed non-trivial amounts of manpower and equipment in Kursk. Over 12,000 troops dead and wounded. And what have the Ukrainians gotten in return? Well, not much actually. The territory they captured offers little strategic value and is hard to defend. At the same time, Russia has accelerated its offensive in the Donbass, capturing numerous settlements with relatively little effort. If Russia keeps up its current pressure, Ukraine could potentially be facing a collapse on two fronts. And instead of negotiating with Russia from a position of strength, Ukraine could soon find itself begging Putin for mercy. However, there is one key difference between Germany in 1918 and Ukraine in 2024, and that is the United States. When Germany collapsed in 1918, there was nobody to bail it out. By contrast, Ukraine is a total proxy of the global American empire. If Ukraine finds itself on the brink of disaster, the US will likely come to its rescue, regardless of who wins the presidential election in November. The reason is quite simple. The US has invested too much money and political prestige to allow Ukraine to fail. And the American political class would rather go to war against Russia than admit that they made a mistake.